All right, so sometimes many of you are saying, I have a podcast, and then what you have is a video piece. So just want to make sure that we've got our basics covered. Podcast usually is audio, right? So when we say we've got a podcast, usually the best practice is it means that you're creating audio content, right? But when you are creating a podcast, you totally should be recording you doing the podcast, either by yourself or if you have guests, right? Because then you can leverage that video content and you can put it on YouTube, you can put it on IGTV, you can create small clips and make it for your Instagram and your Facebook, right? So I just want to make sure that we understand that when we say we got a podcast, mainly it means that you're doing audio content. But that does not mean that you're not going to create video content coming off that podcast. You might probably want to think about how you want to word it. For example, Gary Vee does it really well where he says, you know, my podcast, the audio experience, and then he has the Ask Gary Vee show, and he calls that show, and we know that that's mainly on YouTube. But sometimes he will take some of those YouTube episodes and he will also put it on his podcast, and he says the audio version of my Ask Gary Vee show. So when you are thinking about you doing your podcast, really think about what you want to name it, and that needs to come off how mainly you want this content to be. And it's amazing if you can have podcast audio content, but it will be even more amazing if you're going to have video content. And then actually, I'm going to talk about this later, is you probably would love to also have this transcribed into copy content, right? And now you really are like, wow, now this is like the bomb, because you've got audio, you've got video, and you've got written copy, and now you're appealing to all of these three different segments, and now your volume of content is like whoo, through the roof. So just really wanted to come back in and cover this before we go into the next things that I'm going to cover, to make sure that you don't get those confused. Make sure that if it's a podcast heavily on audio, that you do call it like something podcast, right? If you definitely want to push it more into like the video side of it, maybe you do want to give it another name that's not so heavily called podcast, and maybe it's something show, and then you will say we've got the podcast audio version of this. So just want to make sure that we get this here so that there's no confusion, and that you're doing things like in the best possible way, and make sure that you are video recording your podcasts, because all of that is content, and there is actually no excuses. Even if it's you by yourself, amazing. Just get a camera up, your phone up. Like I record everything using my iPhone XR. It's amazing. The camera is good. So if you got guests, that's even better. If it's you and a partner, and this is two of you doing it, you've got to get that video recording, because all of that is content that's going to help us for our distribution, which is what I'm going to talk to you right next into the next module. So it means you're just going to have so much more content to do so much more stuff. So, all right. Okay, let's go.